Hello, my name is Austin Colburn, a graduate student in the Master of Organizational Leadership program at Gonzaga University. This video presentation is the second of a three-part series created as my final project for the ORGL 605 Imagine, Create, and Lead course, and is intended to be an introduction to some interesting topics in leadership and how someone might be able to apply them in an educational leadership setting. For that reason, even some of the more high-level concepts discussed will hopefully be handled in such a way that adults, young adults, and teenagers can all apply them in their daily lives. At the end of this video, there will be a small number of reflection questions for you to consider. I'm assuming you're watching this video alone, so it's okay to do them in your head or on a piece of paper. However, if you happen to have a friend, colleague, or loved one nearby, I encourage you to bring them in and share the discussion with them. So with that said, let's get started. In the last video, we covered the open space meeting format and self-directed learning. In this video, we'll be discussing authentic leadership and storytelling as ways to build better bonds with followers and students. Researchers Shamir and Elam define authentic leadership in several terms. Authentic leaders do not pretend to be leaders just because of their position, nor do they work on developing the image of a leader. Rather, they are original. They come to believe what they do and act how they do through experience and not imitation. Experience is the key word here. And the path from that experience leading to the formation of values and beliefs is an essential part of building what Shamir and Elam call a self-narrative, a sort of story that one might tell themselves to understand how life plays out in an intelligible, systematic sequence of events in an unfolding process. In other words, it's a story that describes how each event in a person's life is connected to another. These connections also describe the leadership process. True leadership is less about getting people to do what you tell them and more about influencing people within the relationships you have with them. Likewise, those people influence the leader too, whether they admit it or not, and by sharing experience, write themselves into each other's self-narratives. Here's an example. Have you ever listened to a motivational speaker? When I was in high school, we brought in plenty. In college, we had guest lectures, and at fundraising or celebratory events, you see a keynote speaker on the program. Whatever you call them, their job is usually to share some kind of story or experience that changed the way they live their lives, forced them to see the world in a different way. And so they share it with others in the hopes that their listeners change as well. Of course, they can't force you to do this. They don't stand in front of the audience and say, "You're going to change your outlook or else," as if you could be fired for refusing. No, this person is inviting you into a relationship of sorts and sharing their self-narrative with you in the hopes that they can influence you to see the world differently. In order to really see the world through a new set of eyes, we might need a little bit of imagination, sometimes moral imagination. Researchers Enlow and Popa suggest that poor leadership may be described in part as a lack of imagination, holding too firmly to the world as it is without exploring the world as it might be. So, leaders, and by association, teachers and students, should do their due diligence in exercising their imagination by connecting the dots between events, past and present, to imagine different outcomes from the ones we expect, tired and jaded as they might be. The hope is, by doing this, we can expand our range of possibilities when faced with difficult decisions. What makes this moral is that we can use this type of imaginative decision-making to stop ourselves from falling into our comfortable patterns for deciding what's fair and what's not. We challenge ourselves to look at situations through the eyes of others as they experience them, rather than our own versions of what we consider to be objective and fair. Ultimately, we can use the self-narrative we talked about earlier and turn it upside down, inside out, and really get to asking who we are and how we came to be, and use what falls out along the way to try to better understand others. One very easy way to start doing this is by finding and listening to people who look different, act different, and think differently than you do. This isn't exactly a novel idea, but incredibly important, and has never been easier thanks to the internet. Here are 3 of my favorite TED Talks that can shake up the way you look at the world. First is Chimamanda Adichie's The Danger of a Single Story. Adichie talks about her journey from a young girl in Nigeria to an internationally successful author, and her struggle to see herself reflected in the stories she heard, and even in the ones she told herself. Second is Daryl Davis's Why I, as a Black Man, Attend KKK Rallies. Davis is a musician, but ever since the days he experienced racism for the first time at age 10, he sought to understand why someone could hate him without knowing him. As the title suggests, he does indeed attend KKK rallies and makes a lot of unlikely friends in his search for an answer. Third is Malcolm Gladwell's The Unheard Story of David and Goliath. Many people, religious or not, are familiar with this tale, but it's almost always seen as an underdog success story. Gladwell provokes us to think more deeply about the things we take for granted, to see what else we can learn from them, no matter how old they are. In the spirit of authenticity and storytelling, I thought I might share a bit about how and why I chose to pursue leadership studies. Much of it revolves around the lack of Asian American leadership on a local and national level. I'm Asian American, by the way, and as a multiracial Filipino American, I didn't have many role models outside my family to look to. And I know it's not just me. Young Asian Americans and people of color all over the country lack leadership role models, and if we can't find them, we might as well become them for the younger generations. Enough about me, though. What about you? Think about your own self-narrative. If you had to talk to someone about yourself for 5 minutes, what would you talk about? What things are absolutely essential to you as a person today? Think about the people you have in your life. How well do you really know them? Consider scheduling a conversation with someone close to you, a loved one, a coworker, your boss, or an instructor, and talk with them. As they tell you about themselves, ask their opinions on topics that you hold close, and don't shy away from a little difference. Now, when this is over, go watch some TED Talks, but before you do, scroll through them and look at the descriptions of the talks and the speakers themselves. Write down any initial thoughts or reactions about what you see as you do this. And now it's over. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, this is the second video in a 3-part series. If you haven't watched the first video on open space and self-directed learning, there's a link in the description below. You'll also find links to the next video in the series on adaptive leadership and to the 3 TED Talks I mentioned earlier.